My guests this evening are Pat Van Hooser, a self-described constitutionalist, and Tony Lewis, a former District 6 Commission candidate. To my very distinguished panel, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Pat, we happen to have a president who happens to be African-American. What does that say about our democracy here in the United States of America?
I think it's incredibly exciting. I think the things that people said would never happen, could never happen, don't believe it's going to happen, it happened. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah,
absolutely. I think you just mentioned before we came on the air here that you had the opportunity to see my program with Dr. Mallory Milliner,
yes.
And as you see, he was saying that about last year he was talking during Black History Month, and he was saying to the class that he may possibly have an African-American president this year, but he did not believe that.
That's
Do
right.
you think now all the cynicism is out of the window now?
You know, it should be. I think so. I really do.
Tony, also, how do you feel as an African-American to realize that we have a president who happens to be African-American as well?
Ben, I'm ecstatic. You know, I never thought that I'd see it in my lifetime, but there was hope that one day it would happen, and I'm glad that I was able to witness it and to see it in my lifetime. You know, Dr. King talked about that dream, and the dream has been fulfilled. 40 years ago, it was made mention, and it's been fulfilled. And I would just like to say this, that it was a dream that has happened not just by Black people, but by Americans, because we don't make up but about 15% of the population, but nevertheless, there have been great strides in this country, and we owe it all to the American people that they didn't see color in this election process.
Well, how do you feel as an African-American, and I agree with you wholeheartedly in terms of the overall recognition. I mean, the whole world was watching America, see what America would do in this time of crisis. The whole world is looking for America for leadership. But as an African-American, how do you feel? What type of burden is put on us now? Because in many ways, sometimes we're looked at in many ways as being the dread of society in terms of the behavior, in terms of things that happen in our community. We don't necessarily agree with that, but what kind of burden does it place on us now as a community?
You know, Ben, I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and our motto is achievement in every field of human endeavor. And that's what we as a people have to look at, this accomplishment and this achievement, that we can set our goals and they are achievable, they're reachable. So we can't no longer look at society as holding us back when we need to be looking forward and striving to reach goals that we set forth, and it lets us know and it shows us that they are attainable.
Well, I'm going to place a real burden on you here with saying that. Did you have opportunity to see the swearing in yesterday?
I did.
What did you think about Reverend Lowry's closing of his prayer?
You know, I listened to it, and, you know, I tried to grasp the concept of, you know, of his words, and they were eloquent words. So some have said that the latter part of his words, in which he was saying that white has to make things right, and that particular part, it discussed a lot of people, and I've seen comments on it. But nevertheless, you know, we've arrived, but we still have a long way to go, and there are still some things that we as Americans, as white Americans, has to continue to do. And as I've stated, that Black America didn't make Barack Obama president of the United States. It took white America also. So there have been some great strides. And Reverend Lowry's comments, they ought to be placed in the context of what he's gone through in his life, and the struggle that he's gone through and that he's seen in his life and where we are now. So.
Pat, so in terms of the closing lines of his prayer, did you hear that, and what did it say to you at that moment in time, or did it just go over your head? No problem.
No, I thought, gee, I wasn't even born in 1952, and here we are. It's 1952 all over again. I respect the fact that people of his age have endured so much and have struggled so hard and have worked so hard for what rightfully they deserve. But it's like being in the cage and the door's been open a long time. You can walk out. You can get out of the cage. Just go.
Okay.
Don't stay trapped in that prison.
In terms of, let's talk about the inauguration speech here. In terms of the crisis that we find our nation in at this time, do you think that President Obama addressed some of those things in terms of our education, in terms of our financial crisis? Do you think he addressed some of those issues adequately yesterday?
You know, I thought that he was very eloquent, he was uplifting, he was inclusive, he was, you know, he struck the right note. Now, of course, he said a lot of stuff that I don't agree with and I don't like, but I thought that his demeanor and the way that he presented himself and the country was fabulous. But as a constitutionalist, and there hasn't been a constitutional president in 100 years, so I know that I'm fighting a losing battle here. But nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the government is responsible for finding you a good job and for paying for your health care and making sure that you're comfortable in your old age. The opportunity is supposed to be there for people to find that for themselves, that the government needs to stay out of the way. And one of the reasons that I did not support Mr. Obama is because he's all about the government can do it for you, and he mentioned that in his theme yesterday. But let's see how he does.
Yeah, so, but overall, when we talk about the government, talking about infusing cash and talking about education and talking about building roads and bridges and things of that nature, encouraging us to dig deep into our inner selves to move this nation forward, isn't it a very real way at this point in time that the government is going to have to assist in a very real way like it never had done before? Because we're at a place in time that we've never been before. In many instances, the government has gotten us here.
I'm going to say, and that's why we're here, is because the government has gotten us to this point. And so the idea that we need more of this to get us where we need to go, I think is absolutely wrong.
But do you think he said more, or do you think he was saying that the government needs to play a role in it?
He said, and it was a great line, he said, I don't know if it's too big or too small, but it's got to be right.
But got to be right.
And so I think that's going to translate in it needs to be more, but we'll see.
In the comment that we're talking about here, Tony, also, and he said it has to be right, he made mention, if my memory serves me correct in terms of what Pat is saying here, is that he was making mention that the programs that the government had implemented in this country, or the rules of law that we've been operating on, if they have been working, we're going to keep them. And the programs or the rule of law that's not working, we're going to get rid of it. Do you agree with that, or do you agree with Pat in saying that the government has no role in all of this?
I agree with that terminology, that whatever's working, let's keep it, and what's not working, we have to fix it. We have to right those things. And I think what our newly elected president is saying is that we've gotten ourselves in a hole so big till if we are trying to get out of the hole, then what we're going to be doing is putting dirt back into the hole. So the federal government has to come in and has to step in and has to make things right in order for this country to progress and to move forward. And if it takes the government doing that and building bridges and roads and our education system, building schools, then if that's how we're going to help the economy, then that's what we've got to do to help the economy.
Do we sometimes forget when we say government that the people is the government, because this is the government of other people, by the people, and for the people? Do we sometimes forget when we say government, we're talking about people who we elected and put in elected positions across the nation from the local level all the way to the national level, that we forget that still we are talking about the people running the country?
It's the people running the country, and it's the people financing the country. People see government as the big tooth fairy who's out there with the pocket full of money that's going to make everything right, and it's going to be a fine day for everyone. But in fact, it is the people who have to finance this. And don't get me wrong, I am not against public financing of things that should be financed that way. But when you have people who, their real concern, you mentioned education, who should be more concerned about the education of somebody's child than that parent? Mm-hmm. And we have turned the education of our children over to the government, whoever that is. And do we have better educated children today than we had 40 years ago? Do we have fewer children in poverty today than we had 40 years ago? Do we have all these things that the government was going to fix? Did they fix it? I don't think they did. And maybe we need to look for a way to get the people who are the government actually involved and not just turn it over to some big brother person that they don't even know who that is.
Well, also with that, you got, in fairness to you, once again, you did say we have not had a constitutionalist for the president in over 100
Yeah,
years.
no.
But even on the state level, I think it was Senator Eric Johnson was saying about taking and moving money from the public sector to the private sector with kids, school choice per se, but he still is talking about moving government money. So nobody out there is talking about coming out of your pocket, deciding to sit down with your child and educate your child first and foremost yourself. So now we're universal in looking at the government to see that. So this is not something just at President Obama's doorstep. This seems to be a universal position now.
That's right, and it's considered controversial that Eric Johnson's proposal, which is attach the money to the child. Figure out how much money we spend per child and attach the money to that child and let the parent get involved and decide what kind of education that child should have. Should they go to private school? Should they go to public school? Which public school? Which private school? Which vocational school? Let the parent decide that. Attach the money to the child rather than some bureaucrat in Washington who doesn't even know your kid.
But it's still money that's coming out from the government. That's we're back to the same thing.
And while I think that education should be state level and not federal, I could live with that proposal on a nationwide basis. If we're going to spend the money, let's attach it to the child.
So what do you think about that? Because moving money from public education to private education in a very real way.
Yeah, and man, when I look at it, I look at when you talk about the government of the people, for the people, and I don't want to be burdened with undue responsibility and taxes. So there needs to be some fiscal responsibility in the government in the way that they handle the monies that we, the taxpayers, pay in. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be fiscal responsibility. And when it comes down to educating our children, be it the public sector, the private sector, when it comes down to taxpayers' money, I think public school is where it stops. When it comes down to private schools, then I think that anybody that wants to send their child to a private school should have to pay for sending their children to a private school, because if they're a taxpayer, then they need to take advantage of what their taxes are paying for, and that's the public school system. But we need to right the public school system, make the public school system workable for all children, and there are some responsibility that starts from the top all the way down to the bottom in making the public school system work. I believe the public school system works. The public school system is great. I'm a product of the public school system, but it's what the children parent, and it goes back to parenting. You've got to prepare your child for whatever school system that you put them in. So when parents assume the responsibility of their children and helping to educate their children, then a public school system is just as good as a private school system.
But you do agree that it needs to be overhauled at this point in time across the nation?
No doubt about it.
Okay, so now is it safe to say, because there's an underlying current here saying that when we're talking about what Senator Eric Johnson is talking about, moving the money, we're talking about going back to segregation again to the great degree. Is that what's happening here, and nobody wants to talk about that?
How do you get that? I don't understand. Stop. What's segregation? If you attach the money to the child, and that child goes to the prep school or the whatever, there's no we're keeping this child out because we're doing segregation.
Well, we're talking about in terms of all the other things that's going to be attached to it. Possibly you got to make means for the child to get there and all those kinds of things, because you're moving, because most likely history has shown who's going to take advantage of that. Now, that means that the door is open. I agree. We go back to your cage theory that you said the cage is open, walk out of the door, kind of like the elephant that was starved for so many years and didn't realize he was free. Yeah. But at the same time, history has proven who's going to take advantage of that. Only would say the majority community would take advantage of that, and not the minority community take advantage of that opportunity. Now, is it a planned segregation? But that is history there. Go ahead, Tony. You got to say.
Go ahead.
I would say, even in Senator Johnson's proposal, where do you draw the line when it comes down to who's entitled to go to those private schools being funded by taxpayers' money? You know, what's the criteria for being able to enter into that school? Will you have an influx? Will you have an influx or a stampede of all minority students rushing to those schools? There has to be some standards, some criteria that's going to allow, individuals to be able to get to that school. Then when you set up those criteria, then that's when you're separating. That's when the separation begins. Then That's when the segregation will probably begin, because there has to be some criteria.
Okay. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a commercial break.
The Augusta Regional Airport embraces the vision of Augusta and the CSRA.
As we bring in more visitors, more businesses, this is the first impression that they're going to have of Augusta. We will leverage this asset to a brighter future for the city.
This is going to be such a huge asset to the economy of the whole area.
Augusta Regional Airport. Fly there, fly home.
Welcome back. Once again, you're watching Comcast Community Concerns. I'm your host, Ben Hasan. My guest, once again, is Pat Van Hooser and Tony Lewis. Pat, we're going to let you have the closing words in terms of, we was talking about education, we were talking about the private and public sector. So what's your final comments on this?
I would agree with Tony, except I believe in the free enterprise system. And I think that given the opportunity to educate children, knowing that there's an $8,000 a year attachment to that child, or $4,000, or whatever the amount is, that the private sector will step in and they will offer small schools and little Montessori schools. I think there's going to be so many opportunities because somebody will be able to give a good education for a fair price. They're going to see the opportunity, and then the parents, the consumers, will choose what's right for their child, and the ones that fail and the ones that aren't any good, they're going to close and go away, just like a business that doesn't do the right thing fails and goes away, and those that do the right thing and turn out the product, which is the educated child, are going to thrive. I think the free enterprise system can save education.
So let me ask you this, Pat, in terms of, you know, as a constitutionalist right now, in terms of where our nation is, if you had to say, well, Ben, this is what I think would work, what would that be?
Where we are right now?
Where we are right now as a nation.
I think we are turning into Europe very quickly. I think we are turning into the socialist nation where we look to the government for everything.
So you think the government, what role do you think the government plays in all of this?
I think the government should, you know, if you go to the Constitution, they're supposed to provide for the defense and deliver the mail, and that's pretty much it. It's up to the people to decide what needs to be done. And I think the free enterprise system and capitalism will step in and meet the needs for almost everything.
Well, you know, the free enterprise system and the capitalist system in so many ways got us to where we are right now as well.
See?
Now
we're going to have an argument about that as well.
Well, you know, in a very real way. I don't mean the concept itself. It's kind of much like Tony said a few minutes ago in terms of moving the money to private school. Once people begin to implement laws and rules and regulations, they seem to be favorable, not necessarily to a particular race, but in terms of business personality, and people tend to exploit other people. And I say this because President Obama yesterday, he made mentions in the inaugural address. He was talking about greed, as well as irresponsible people on the end who were making the purchases. So from both ends of the spectrum, you find those kinds of things there. From both ends of the spectrum. You find greed from the deregulation and things of that nature because there was nothing to hold people accountable. Case in point, the Bush administration doled out $350 billion.
Yes, sir.
And by way of deregulations, they didn't even have to be accountable. So what they decided to do, they had another party. And they began to dole out money once again to the elite among themselves.
I heard Barney Frank say something about that those evil Bush people. Well, you know what? I'm not a fan of the Bush administration, but Congress had something to do with that too. And by the way, he's head of the House of Ways and Means Committee. So for him to say, "Oh, it's all George Bush," well, that excuse is gone now. By the way, but the fact is, Walter Williams, who is my favorite economist on the planet, wrote an article not long ago, and he was the head of the economics department at George Mason University. And he said, deregulation, really, just in the Bush years, 75,000 new regulations have come into play, and a 63% increase in the number of people working in the government to oversee all these regulations and all this kind of stuff. So the idea that we've actually been deregulated is not true. The idea that you have a lot of lobbyists in there tinkering around and moving stuff around to the advantage of the people they represent, Absolutely, and that's where the real problem is. I don't think it's deregulation.
Well, I think you almost proved my point, didn't you?
How so?
I thought you did. Maybe I misunderstood you. Tony, what you have to say about some of this?
Ben, I'm reminded of when we talk about the government and Pat talks about the government and we need less government. I'm reminded of a security guard that was needed to watch some government materials. Well, they hired the security guard, Ben, and when they hired the security guard, they knew that they had to have somebody to do the security guard's payroll. And when they hired somebody to do the security guard payroll, they had to have somebody over that particular person. So one man's job ended up being 10 people's job. So we're a bunch of bureaucracy for one particular job, and that's what we've got to do. We've got to cut down. We've got to find a way to eliminate the bureaucracy and to make government work for the people. And the way to do that is to have less government intervention in things that are working and try to utilize government intervention into things that are not working by having think tank groups to find out why it's not working, and let's make it work with just less people. Because if we keep employing more people, government keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, then we're not getting anywhere.
Okay. President Obama also said yesterday that we should, in terms of where we are right now, he said the cynics may say we can't do this and we can't do that. He said, but never underestimate the imagination of a free people. Is that what you're saying, Pat, here?
Absolutely.
In saying that we need to talk about entrepreneurship. We need to be talking about innovation here. Those are the kind of things that's going to get us out of this mess. But we still have to realize, Pat, at the end of the day, if there's no money circulating, because that's what the $350 billion in my mind done so much damage to this economy, because it didn't allow the blood to circulate through the body of the system. It just went into somebody's pocket, in essence, and just shut down. So so that's where the government comes in right about now, to try to get that blood back into the body, even if it's not for the long haul, but for the short term. Can you agree to that?
I agree that $350 billion didn't have any oversight, and whose fault is that? It's the government, whether
Absolutely.
it's Bush or the Congress or whomever it was. You got to have the oversight. If they'd had that, they were supposed to lend that money out. That money would be circulating now, except that the banks squirreled it away or bought other banks. They didn't use it for the purpose it was intended, and unfortunately, the people in charge of that program didn't think it was important to write that into there and make somebody accountable. You got to have accountability.
Tony, if you had to right now give us an idea of what you think would turn this nation around, what would your suggestion be?
Ben, there are so many things right now that is not right with this nation, and we're seeing the effects of it now with our economic conditions. I think that the people, one of the greatest things that I think to stimulate this economy, and I don't know how far-fetched it is, but we talk about the monies that we got on last year, the stimulus money that each family received. And I think the best way to stimulate this economy is to have a moratorium on taxes, on federal income tax, Social Security tax. That means that every working person is working a 6-month moratorium, no taxes taken out on anybody. That way, the money, the disposable income that we'll receive each week from our pay, we'll be able to do things with that money to spur the economy, as opposed to the government sending you another $300 that really doesn't mean a hill of beans to the economy. And I said that to say this, the banks, as she's already stated, the banks were supposed to be lending money. They didn't lend money. They just bought up other banks. And what they were doing was continue to secure the money of the depositors that they have, because they've got to pay interest to those depositors. But what better way for them to make money than to go out and lend money to consumers? Therefore, the interest that consumers will be paying will do what? Will give an increase to banks, because that's what banking industry is. It's for profit. And that's how they raise their money. But they're not doing those things, and somebody's got to be responsible. And the government talks about these are some of the things that you must do, and these are some of the things you should not do. But then nobody's really telling them that you've got to put money back into the American people's pocket. You've got to go back and lend money to the consumers, and that's going to spur the economy. But a moratorium, a 6-month moratorium on taxes, I would love to be able to have that at disposable income, and I can do a lot of things with it.
So let me ask the both of you in terms of understanding, as we look at President Obama's speech and all through the primaries and everything else, and we look at his talk yesterday, inauguration speech yesterday, I think was missing for most Americans that we're not looking at. He's also talking to the human spirit. He's also encouraging us to get involved, to grab the bull by the horn, and to pull ourselves about bootstraps. He's talking about responsibility again. Do you find it to be a good thing?
I do, and I was excited about it, and I think that he's a wonderful leader, young and energetic, and he has the potential to make this be the best presidency ever. You're right, there's a burden on him because he's the first African American and because he's young and all these things, but the potential to make this really a home run is there for him, and I think he might be able to do it.
Because he's also saying to us, as we go back to 2004, which I didn't even know he existed at that point,
Right.
when he was saying that there's no blue America, there's no red America, we're the United States of America.
Yeah.
Has that drawn the world to look at America once again as the leader of the free world? And with him appealing to the everyday common people, do you think that we're going to be able to, what portion of a recovery as a nation do you think that play? Because we know, we talked about money, but also I'm a believer that play just is a vital part about how well I feel about myself, because we all talk about self-esteem. You have a program, you understand the value of that, where you make investments in the lives of young people.
Right.
What percentage of our recovery does that play if you had to put it in a percentage term?
I think it's 80%. If the people don't believe, nothing's going to work. So the believing has got to come first. That's more important than anything.
I would agree with Pat also with that 75-80% percentile range in there. You know, what was interesting in his inaugural speech, you know, he talked about what we the people have got to do, as you've mentioned, and not so much we, and he mentioned Muslims. I mean, he reached across to say that this is a presidency that's gonna descend all presidencies, because he's saying that we the people have got, the only way to end a lot of things is that the people have got to come together, and the only way to get a lot of things started is people have got to come together. So we have to help this president to be the best president that he can be, and he has the potential to go down in history as being a great president. But there's a lot of work for us as individuals that we have to do also.
And that was a great point you just mentioned, just then, Tony, in terms of mentioning that he reached out and he broadened the spectrum from a religious perspective.
Absolutely.
Because, Pat, you are a constitutionalist, and so many times when you hear people saying this is a Christian nation, as a constitutionalist, do you agree with that?
That we're a Christian nation?
A Christian nation.
No, I don't. I think that we are a religious nation, and there are many religions, and one of the religions is no religion at all. So, but I think that we are a good and decent people because we have that responsibility to each other, which is considered religious by a lot of people.
You kind of acted surprised when I say that we hear people all the time that this is a Christian nation. Number one, was you surprised? And once again, do you feel that that is important, that people understand and respect religious diversity?
Absolutely, you have to respect it. Yes, you must. And I think there were a lot of people who were disappointed that the president invoked, you know, the Lord's name a couple of times. I think they were surprised. They weren't expecting that, this, you know, separation of church and state, which is a big myth anyway. Yeah, I think that religion is, especially in the case of the United States of America, where we respect each other, is a wonderful thing and actually helps us achieve our goals.
Tony, also with yourself, same question in terms of, do you see it as a Christian nation, or do you see it, as Pat said, a religious nation?
It's a religious nation because more than just Christians live in the United States of America, and you have all kinds of practicing religions in this country. And who's to say that your religion is better than my religion? But, you know, as long as you don't try to impart your religion on me, you're free to worship as you desire, and that's what makes this country so great. We're not, you know, iron-fisted when it comes down to religion. Everybody can worship whatever religion, you know, that they so desire in this country, in this United States of America, the land of the free, and that's what it's all about.
So is our crisis at the end of the day, we got about 15 seconds each on this, Of our crisis, at the end of the day, even though we know man-made, let's accept that for a given, but is it the moral to the story that at the end of the day that we are where we are, and it's to make us see the bigger picture that we all are one, and at the same time that we all are one people.
We are one people, and we must accept personal responsibility for making our little part of the big one better.
Absolutely, I agree with Pat. We all have to assume our responsibility in the role that we play in making America the real melting pot that America is. And all of us have a personal responsibility.
Well, thank you very much, both of you all, for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you for having me.
You have been watching Comcast Community Concerns, where we're always moving our community into the future. Have a blessed day.